Good afternoon, and welcome to Making It Work. My name is Allison McCann, and I am the Vice President of Business Development for the Portland Press Herald. Thank you for joining us today for our penultimate Making It Work event. What a year, but I am grateful that through this series, we've been able to gather to work through some of 2020's interesting challenges. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you'd like to catch up on any previous event discussions, you can go to pressherald.com/events and watch recordings of them. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our gratitude to our Making It Work sponsors. They are Cross Insurance, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Katahdin Trust Company, and MEMIC. And now I'd like to introduce the Vice President of External Communications at MEMIC, Tony Payne. Tony?
Thank you, Allison, and welcome everybody. This is a phenomenal topic because as we think about the Maine economy, the way that you grow an economy is to bring money into it from away. And that means that we need to be exporting and bringing those goods and services from Maine to others, selling them and bringing the money back. And that creates jobs. And so that's really what MEMIC is all about, is to make sure that whatever jobs are created in Maine are done safely. And so folks can go back to work day after day without fear of injury or any kind of disability. So that's why MEMIC has decided to sponsor this series, is that we do insure about 18,000 employers across the entire state. And we estimate that's about 200,000 to 250,000 workers. And we have that obligation to try to make sure that, in fact, they remain safe. So take the tips today, figure out how can you ship your goods or services abroad, be it across the state border or all the way across the world. And let's grow the Maine economy safely.
Thank you, Tony. Now I'll hand things over to our Special Projects Editor, Carol Coltis. Carol.
There we go. Thanks, Allie. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you here today. We were talking in the newsroom, we were discussing the issue of trade. And it occurred to me that over the last several years, there's been a lot of attention on federal trade policies, and there's been a lot of volatility in that. And most of our coverage, I think, has focused on the impact on the lobster industry. As many of you will recall, we were on pace to triple our exports of live lobster to China in 2018 when there were tariffs that we imposed on China, and China's retaliatory tariffs added what amounted to a 25% surcharge on our lobster exports. And so the bottom kind of fell out of that market for some time. But it occurred to me, well, what about all the other products that Maine has been exporting? How have the trade policies affected those? And we have a new administration coming in January. And what might those trade policies, I've got some folks to speculate on what they might be, and what could the impact be for Maine businesses? Are there new opportunities that hadn't existed before? So while our attention was sort of diverted around lobster and trade, there have been some interesting developments here in Maine. There's been significant investment in our port facilities, and Eimskip, the Icelandic shipping company that calls its US home at the International Marine Terminal in Portland, has also been investing and expanding its routes. So now there are more opportunities to ship to markets in Europe, and now with a connection in Halifax, Asian markets have opened up. So there's been a lot of activity, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to talk about that and to talk about what opportunities that might be, Maine businesses could avail themselves of at this particular point in time. So to do that, I got 4 fabulous people to agree to be panelists today. I'm going to introduce them very briefly. Their expanded bios are on our website if you're curious, and we're going to chat for like 30 or 40 minutes, and then we will take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom navigation bar, and are always capable behind the scenes advisor, Strawberry Motione, will queue up the questions and we'll get rolling on those as we head toward the latter part of the hour together. So let me introduce our panelists. The first is Jonathan Ness. He is the CEO of the Maine Port Authority. So if you don't know, the Port Authority develops, maintains, plans, and promotes port and intermodal facilities across the state as a way to stimulate commerce and enhance competitiveness on a global level for Maine's economy. Prior to joining the MPA, John was a deputy commissioner at the Maine Department of Transportation, and he worked as a senior advisor in the governor's office. And one of the issues that he worked on was transportation. Also joining us is Janine Bissayon-Carey. She is the founder and president of the Montserrat Group. So that is an international consulting company that provides business development and market entry strategies for growing companies, economic development groups, and government entities. I got to know Janine while she was the president of the Maine International Trade Center, a position she had for 11 years that capped her 16-year tenure with that agency. And she left to form her consultancy. So coincidentally, we have Wade Merritt on our panel, who succeeded Janine as the president of what we call MITSI in 2017. And that caps, well, it doesn't cap, it continues a 22-year career that Wade has had with the Maine International Trade Center. As president, he's responsible for directing the trade and investment policy for the state, including the delivery of international trade services to Maine's business and academic communities. And finally, we have Brian Cody, who is the National Sales Director of Bar Harbor Foods. So Brian joined the company in 2016. It was founded by his dad, and now he is the sales director for the premium all-natural seafood company that serves groceries and other food retail outlets. You've seen their products in your grocery aisles. They're cans that are, they have a really simple design. They're white with just some simple lettering, but I guarantee you the contents are delicious. I've had their chowder for a long time. The whiting-based company exports its chowders, bisques, and other products to markets in Mexico and Canada. So Brian is our boots on the ground guy. He's going to be able to talk about what the impact has been of these trade policies on his company and what he's looking for in terms of opportunities going forward. So my first question I'm going to toss to John because he's the guy who can really summarize all of these investments that I just mentioned briefly. But that's the first thing. I'd like to talk about the investments that have been made in the state's shipping capacity, and how do you see those initiatives benefiting Maine businesses? So, John, could you get things rolling for us, please?
You bet. Thank you for that introduction and this opportunity, Carol. The state of Maine has been investing in transportation infrastructure that does improve the movement of freight nationally and internationally. So the Maine Port Authority owns assets in Portland and in Searsport. Here in Portland, at the International Marine Terminal, where I'm coming from today, is a great success story of developing essentially a former brownfield into a thriving and growing international multimodal facility. So in 2013, we attracted Eimskip, the Icelandic shipping company, to Portland, Maine. Drew them away from Norfolk, Virginia, where they'd been for many years. And since them coming here, we've been investing into their business. And it's been growing leaps and bounds. Since 2013, we had about a 20% growth year over year until last year. This year in COVID, we're going to come just about level the previous year. So in COVID times, I guess level is the new growth. But we're really poised to see great growth coming out of this on the other side. About $70 million has been put into the terminal, land acquisition, environmental cleanup. We have a rail connection directly to the terminal, which I'll touch on in a minute. Cranes, pier work, buildings, equipment, all the things that make a port successful. I'm thrilled to say that in just a couple of weeks, we have another new crane arriving, coming from Germany. And that will be our third crane here on the terminal. We'll probably go back to using two brand new ones. The rail connection is become increasingly important. News the other day of Pan Am entering into talks with CSX Railway provides that logistical connection all up and down the East Coast, all the way from Portland to Miami and into the Midwest. We're really excited about that. But all in all, the investments have proven out. Eimskip went to weekly service about 3 years ahead of schedule. And weekly service is really critical for BCOs, the owners of cargo, to have that reliability. So what we're doing now with Eimskip is looking at bigger ships coming to this terminal. But it's a great opportunity to access Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and indeed through our connection with CMA and Halifax, the entire world.
Cool. And can you give us a quick update on the cold storage facility?
So one of the things we identified some time ago is Maine's food and beverage industry really being a strong point for Maine. It's part of the Maine brand, good food, clean food, and it sells well. So given that a large portion of our cargo coming through here, pre-COVID, about 30% is refrigerated cargo, that an on-terminal freezer warehouse makes a lot of sense. So we've been moving that forward. There is a developer that we're working with, Amber Infrastructure, London-based equity firm. And I'm proud to say that about a month ago, we got our building permits from the city of Portland, and we're moving forward with the bidding and construction pricing as we speak.
Great, terrific. So Janine and Wade, with the folks that you guys deal with, have these investments drawn interest from your clients, the people that you serve?
Well, I think, this transportation has always been a big issue for us. I mean, we survey the companies that the Trade Center works with regularly and ask them, what are you considering to be your barriers to export? And the top three are always, trying to find somebody to buy the product. Obviously, is a big one. You find somebody who wants to actually purchase it. One is, really making sure that the people who actually work for the companies know what they're doing and how to take advantage of those opportunities. Those are the things that the Trade Center is good at and works on in consulting and working with companies. Number one, though, always, whether it's a state-based study or some national ones, is access to affordable and easy transportation. All of that makes no difference if you can't get the product out the door. So it is. That is always listed number one. We're thrilled to see, the purchase of the rail lines. Also, Eimskip coming to town was big for us. The cold storage facility will also be big for our producers here. 65% of what Maine exports leaves the state by road. It may not leave the country by road, but it leaves the state by road. These investments are certainly are a step in the right direction of changing that and getting product out in a different way.
Good. And what about you, Janine?
I would just chime in saying, I was fortunate to be around when we, did land Eimskip and saw the differential of having to ship everything to Boston, or usually Boston or New York, some things through Halifax. And the reduction in costs in terms of transportation was sizable. And so it's been awesome in terms of, access to markets, particularly Northern European markets, which Eimskip really shines at. Also their flexibility. So unlike a lot of the large scale lines that go out of New York, Eimskip allows you to do less than container load shipments, sometimes pallet load shipments. All of that flexibility is huge for Maine because, Maine is a state of small businesses, right? And a lot of trade starts small. It might start with sampling or a, small air freight, container going over and then building up from there. So having that, not only the connection, but also that flexibility was huge for a lot of our, and still remains huge for a lot of our small and medium-sized enterprises that, you know, take a little bit more time to, you know, both scale up, might not have the resources to take a risk on a high volume, you know, first load, but that's played a major part, and certainly much better than what was going on there, where a lot of our snow was being stored for many years down at the Port of Portland. So I think that anyone involved with international trade is so enthusiastic about having a direct link here.
So Janine, since you mentioned like a low risk entry and maybe sending samples, I wonder, John, if now is the time to mention your new program with the first pallet shipping free.
Sure thing. The Port Authority has a program called First Pallet Free. And exactly as Janine was suggesting, there's a lot of risk. And this program is designed to take one little piece of that risk off the table. If you're a first-time shipper or you're a shipper trying a new market, anywhere on the Eimskip line, the Port Authority will pay for your first shipment. It's that simple. We want you to be able to go try these things out. We know trade is complicated, but I'm here to say there are a lot of resources, particularly with Wade and the Maine International Trade Center. A lot of the stuff they do, I think, is probably a broader aspect of it, but your first pallet free is a great way to try a market. We've had several businesses do it. We just heard from one a few weeks ago that got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business from sending a sample. So I encourage all of the listeners, if you're interested in exporting, to contact us, contact Wade certainly, and see if if this could work for you.
So is that customer that got those sales, are they planning to, you know, adopt a regular export component to their business operation?
They're already exporting, but this was a new market for them.
Okay.
And the cool thing from our perspective is now they'll be using the IMT to ship that product.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked. We've had a couple other examples where it's paid off, and at a minimum, it lets that small business take a big risk, but maybe a little less risk on the table.
Okay. So Brian, let me bring you into the conversation now. Are there any particular investments happening that you and Bar Harbor Foods are watching carefully? Is there something that you see developing that will enhance your ability to export your product?
I mean, the program that John just mentioned sounds fantastic, honestly. As a smaller company, there are a lot of barriers to doing that kind of overseas business. So anything that can loosen those barriers is always helpful for us. You know, you make a lot of good contacts at programs like the Food Export Northeast, who do a fabulous job of bringing in, you know, buyers from foreign markets that may be interested in products. You know, specifically in my industry, in the food industry, and you make those contacts, but then, you know, where do you go from there? Do you have to airship them product? You know, we're a canned goods company. It's heavy freight. Other people may be able to get away with, you know, doing air shipments that are light. You know, if you're making bags of chips, obviously it's a lot lighter, but canned goods being heavier. So I think that's something that we will definitely look to take advantage of in the future.
Oh, terrific. Well, so Maine has been trying to promote the food and beverage sector for international markets. And I wonder if within that industry, there are specific opportunities. So Brian, you just mentioned the First Pallet Free program might be something that your company is interested in exploring for new markets. Janine, can you talk a little bit about what other opportunities are there specifically for the food and beverage industry? I know that you've been working, doing some consultancy in that role.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm actually working with a food accelerator program at Maine Center for Entrepreneurs, mostly all on domestic, well, including Canada, but and basically, you know, the industry has just been hit so hard by COVID, particularly hotel, restaurant, institutional, what we call food service sector. I mean, that doesn't have borders. That's been throughout North America and overseas. And I said I wasn't going to say the P word, but everyone is trying to change into how do we, you know, attract and change our production so that we can service more retail, grocery, you know, where there has been a significant uptick. Now, I think what's happened is a lot of our, even, you know, for Maine, are the larger companies have been incorporating more retail type items. And my hope and is as we come out of COVID and as we launch into 2021, that some of those products that we've been doing testing, scaling up, sorry about that, and you know, the viability, you know, testing the viability on the domestic market will then have some capacity on the export market that a lot of these companies have had some, you know, connections in, particularly through servicing food service, but now have some new developments, new breadth in terms of their product lines to be able to go after retail. And the other thing that I really like about that is that includes a lot of value added products, which are the type of products that I'm sure that, you know, John with the cold storage and IMT want to see, because they generally have, you know, some longer shelf lives, you know, need storage for longer periods of time. A lot of them are frozen, you know, some of them chilled, but a lot of frozen items. So I think that for a lot of our industries, whether it's blueberry sector, potato sector, seafood for sure, I'm working a lot on new product development and retail development, and I can see that emerging in 2021 and beyond as new export opportunities.
Wow, terrific. Wade, do you want to jump in on the food and beverage sector, or John, either of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this is one of the major industry sectors that we work on. You know, this is, and I'm lumping kind of seafood and food together within our shop. They're kind of, they're separate under the same staff member, however, who works on market development for these sorts of things. But I think, you know, for the purpose of this conversation, we can kind of put them together. They've been largely, it's been a pretty successful sector for us. I mean, I think the lobster industry alone, in a typical year, there's nothing typical about 2020, obviously. I'm not going to use the other word you didn't want me to use today. It has nothing been typical about 2020 this year, but in a normal year, you're looking at lobster as being kind of live lobster as being the number one exported commodity from the state. We certainly expect that will likely continue once we return to some semblance of normal order. We do 4 trade events a year that our staff organizes for the seafood industry and then also for specialty foods. One of them on the West Coast. You know, the International Trade Center going to California sounds a little funny, but it is a major show for the Pacific Rim for a lot of companies that are kind of in the place where Janine was talking, and that kind of in between spot of you're bigger than your regional market. You're looking for national, and maybe international is your next step. And that's usually a nice jumping off point. I did want to go off a bit about what Brian was talking about as far as the market access program through Food Export USA. If there are food producers out there, that is an excellent program to do export development for companies in the food sector. It has a very high match component for trade events, for labeling, for all kinds of services that companies that are just starting out or even have some experience really need to be able to be successful. We've had a lot of companies use it over the years and been really successful at it. So I want to make sure we get a shout out for that.
Cool. And John, are you getting a lot of queries from people in the food and beverage industry about when will that cold storage facility be ready? I'm just wondering if you've been able to gauge anything that's specific to the IMT that will enhance the food and beverage industry going forward.
There's certainly a lot of interest in getting it up and going, and certainly the market research we've done and the developer has done is proving that out. I think what we're seeing is a major restructuring of supply chains. The old just-in-time supply system doesn't necessarily work for all businesses. Certainly, immediately after COVID, what we saw here at the terminal was a dramatic uptick in food and medicine coming through the terminal. We were averaging about 30% refrigerated containers prior to that. It went up as high as 70%
Wow.
of the containers we were bringing in was either food or medicine. I can tell you the vessel that was in just a couple days ago was at 50% still. And in some instances, that's raw product coming in that can then be processed here in Maine and re-exported or sold domestically. I think one of the most creative approaches to marketing made in food and beverage overseas is something that the Brewers Association put together called the Maine Beer Box. It's really brilliant. It's a 40-foot refrigerated container that's been turned into the largest kegulator on the planet. And what they do is it ships. It's a shipping container. So throw it on a ship and we can drop it off in Iceland or in Halifax or in England, and they'll have a festival with Maine beer. Something I think we all, well, I truly appreciate the quality of Maine beer, but what I didn't appreciate is how many other people appreciate the quality of Maine beer. The event that we held in Leeds, England, resulted in a large number of sales of Maine beer to England. To me, that's the end of the American Revolution. We won. We are selling beer to Europe, and they enjoy it.
Is it warm? Is it warm beer? That's what I want to know.
Nothing's warm after you cross the North Atlantic in the winter. But it's funny. There were some lessons there, and it's a great note for smaller or first-time shippers. Is a simple thing about how you pack a container. It's not the same as putting it in a truck and shipping it to Pennsylvania. The North Atlantic in the winter is one of the more challenging environments around, and so one of the things we're now offering first-time shippers is sitting down with Eimskip, their warehouse guys, and just making sure you're packing your material correctly so it gets there in good shape.
So you offer like a little tutorial for folks who are trying it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple techniques, but you might not think of it if you're used to shipping by truck.
Okay, good. So let me ask about trade policy. Certainly there was some volatility under the Trump administration with what had been established trade policy and then was sort of turned on its head. I'm thinking of NAFTA and the new version of that. I'm thinking of tariffs that have been imposed in countries that we had previously free trading relationships with. And so I'm wondering, what are you guys anticipating from a Biden administration? Are your clients positioning themselves for anything in particular? Or I know that I'm asking you to look in a crystal ball, but if you could just sort of speculate, and we won't hold you to it, but just speculate on what you think might change under a Biden administration, and whomever wants to go first, be my guest.
Boy, I think the connection's going, Carol. Something's going on.
I'll go first. I don't have anyone to report into. Basically, I think that business likes continuity and stability. And I think that has been a real challenge for anyone involved with international trade over the last few years. Not knowing when there is going to be another tit for tat, which is what happens in trade. When somebody creates some kind of tariff, there are going to be retaliating duties, and it starts spiraling from there. And we have gotten caught on so many different levels. Yes, lobster was the most dramatic, but manufacturers and the increase on costs on steel and aluminum. I mean, so many different levels. The newest one that has come out released on the EU in terms of increasing, because of the longstanding Boeing Airbus struggle. Businesses don't like that, and they've been positioning for it. I mean, it's been a very challenging environment for the last couple of years in terms of, businesses trying to figure out the future path forward and, mitigate their risk. I know we may talk about, Brexit in a little bit here, but, people have been trying to position based on that. And that's been years in discussion and coming, and at least they have time to plan and make those changes. When you suddenly have something that right off the bat, throws a tariff on that, it's just not good in terms of, trying to forecast out your sales and whatever. I think with the new administration, the hope is that we have a realignment with some of our traditional allies. I know there's been a lot of articles around that. Europe, I do think with some, particularly the new relaxation on the duties for lobster, that's going to open up some opportunities with some of our really longtime traditional trading partners, Italy, Spain, France, that are the traditional markets for those products. So I think that overall, a lot of the businesses that I've spoken with are looking forward to a new balance again in terms of trade and in terms of it being predictable and not as risk heavy.
I think predictability is kind of the name of the game here, right? I think that is and I'm watching Brian nodding, thankfully.
Yes, nodding.
He's the business guy, right? And we're all saying businesses like certainty. And so businesses like certainty. And I think what I'm hearing in the kind of trade press is, that the number one, that the Biden administration actually the incoming administration has not really put out a whole lot about what its trade policy is going to look like. There's a lot of speculation by a lot of people. I found myself listening to some work from the Peterson Institute, which is kind of one of the leading think tanks on this stuff down in DC over the weekend. And, even they were kind of speculating on, well, this is what we think is going to happen. This is what we don't think is going to happen. I think what's clear, though, is that the trade policy seems to be that it will follow the sort of stated foreign policy, which is sort of a return to multilateralism of we need our friends and our allies to be able to help move the U.S.'s trade policy interests forward. And that takes a whole lot of forms. We won't go too far down this path, I promise, but there are things that need to happen at the WTO that kind of sets the rules for what international trade policy looks like and how nations interact with each other on trade policy. There is a need for WTO reform. Frankly, the U.S. can't go it alone on that. It really needs like-minded nations to kind of get in behind it, or at least be part of the coalition of the willing to kind of move that forward. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen from a trade policy perspective that is like so far above the needs of a typical company here in Maine. But I do think that the big change that we're likely to see early is going to be just a change of tone. The fact of the matter is the trade issues between the U.S. and the EU, and really the trade issues between the U.S. and China, are real. I think the conversation begins with what is the right way to deal with them, and I think that the first steps towards that are going to be really a move towards multilateralism and a move back towards a rules-based trading regime that starts with WTO reform, which is very policy wonky, but I think that's likely what we'll see first.
Cool.
Yeah. So from my perspective, the trade policies themselves, obviously, I do not get involved in whatsoever, but it's the impact that it has on our business. Right. And to everyone's point earlier, the stability, the predictability is the most important thing. The hardest thing that we're tasked to do is forecast what's going to happen. And it's hard enough in a stable environment to forecast where your sales are going to be and where they're going to go, from year to year without outside influences coming in on those. So, the outside influences that are surprises are always difficult to manage. For an example with us, we pack everything in cans. So steel and aluminum being taxed coming in from China, massive impact on our business. You have to figure out what you're going to do if you're going to eat that, if you're going to try to pass it along. And then when you export product to other countries, you can be hit with a double whammy where you have a tax on the raw material goods and then a tax on the finished goods going in. So, it's working with your trade partners in those regions to try to best figure out how we're going to manage this. Can the product survive a price increase? Are people willing to pay more for it because they know, or are you going to take a short-term hit? So the stability, the predictability, those are the key factors, I think, for anybody trying to sell products domestically or abroad.
So Brian, let me just ask, is there anything specifically that you're looking for, like that would be really helpful for Bar Harbor Foods from the Biden administration? Is there, are you keeping your fingers crossed that there'll be a rollback of a particular tariff, or what are you hoping for?
Well, I think if we can get to a point where we're not having as many of these sort of tariff wars, the tit for tat going back and forth, there was a period of time there where I was looking at Canadian tariffs weekly to see which one of our products was going to fall under this, because it was product specific. It
Right.
was container specific, whether it was, aluminum, glass, cardboard. It got really kind of in the nitty gritty as to what was being taxed at what rate. So again, if we can kind of not have that trade war and more of an open environment, that's friendly for all business. It doesn't matter what your industry is.
Great. John, do you want to weigh into this, or?
No, I think that was pretty well covered. If you're a business and you want to trade and you're able to, we're here to help you do that. And part of our message to Maine and regional businesses is think about it. Think about the cost of shipping overseas versus domestically. We follow this principle called cost-based geography. And the notion being,
slide.
Pardon me?
Time for that slide.
Would you mind? So
Yeah.
the concept of cost-based geography is the fact that shipping by sea is very cost-effective. You have a vessel with 700 or 14,000 containers on it versus, say, a truck with one container. So there's an economy of scale to maritime shipping. And this slide essentially shows that roughly, if you're going to ship something to New Jersey or to Delaware or Virginia, the cost of sending that product by truck is comparable to sending it by ship to Reykjavik or to Norway or to elsewhere in Scandinavia. And that's neat in itself because there's new markets there. European supply chains are changing. Consumers are asking for more variety than perhaps they'd had in the past. But the really cool thing for Maine products is the pricing. If you're in Tromsø, Norway, folks are used to paying quite a bit more for basic retail goods. So if you have a jar of jelly that costs $800 to send to New Jersey, but it also costs $800 to send to Reykjavik, but that jar of jelly in New Jersey is worth $2, and in Reykjavik it's worth $7. That makes a lot of sense to us. So what we're encouraging folks is just to take a look at it and take a look at the costs and appreciate that you have options available right here in Maine.
Great. So let me ask one other sort of a follow-up question. I think that of all of the trade changes that happened over the last 4 years, the one that surprised me the most were the tariffs imposed on Canadian imports under the guise of national security issues. And I was like, with Canada? I was so surprised by that. And so I'm wondering, what do you think? Will there be a lasting impact from that? Or do you think business is like, yeah, this is just a blip on the screen, Canada and US or Canada and Maine, we've had a long relationship, it'll be back to normal soon. Just, they're our biggest trading partner, obviously. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're going in crystal ball territory again there, but yeah, no, I mean, I think, I've been fond of seeing this for years, and prior to taking on the role as president here, I spent 10 years as our Canada desk director. So
right.
Spent a fair amount of time on that side of the border, and oftentimes kind of just refer to them as not our neighbors to the north and east, it's sort of our cousins. When we looked at how Canadian trade has evolved over the last year or so, really, even in the face of this pandemic with the border closure, and I am speaking here only of kind of commercial trade. We're not talking about retail and tourism and that sort of thing, but the commercial trade. It's held up. I mean, I think exports are down 8%, which is not super, but it's not certainly not catastrophic. Imports were up 25%. The disparity there is around the cost of oil and gas that's coming through John's ports. But the fact of the matter is the trade never really stopped between the U.S. and Canada, between Maine and Canada. Some of these issues extend beyond the state. Some of these issues, the steel and aluminum, you're not necessarily going to find in the trade stats because, for example, if Brian's buying aluminum steel to make cans, we're buying cans and then re-exporting, you may not necessarily see that. It's a couple of transactions removed from the data that we see. So it's not that it had no impact, but the impact, from the numbers that we look at was limited, and I think bodes well for the future as things again start to return to something approaching normal.
Are you seeing any impact from the new version of NAFTA? Are there significant changes there that affect Maine businesses?
Well, I'm watching Janine nodding, so Janine's going to have an answer here, I think, too, which is good. From our side, not yet. It's early. The agreement only came into effect in July. We have not seen. I think the most recent trade numbers we have right now are September. And to be honest, any trade policy moves are going to be dwarfed at that macro level. They're going to be dwarfed by the pandemic and what else has been going on in the economy. Okay. Janine, it looked like you had something to say.
Go ahead, Janine.
I think the two that come to mind, and again, it's anecdotal, and I don't think you're going to see numbers necessarily too quickly, as Wade was saying. There is some influence with the new USMCA, the new NAFTA, right. In terms of requiring more North American content for automobile manufacturing and its parts. So there are some increased opportunities, and I think going to be some good opportunities for some of our metal and parts manufacturers that we do have in Maine to play a role in that. I think that the other one that, again, I've heard from a couple of companies, but I don't think they're huge dollar amounts yet, but there were some relaxation in terms of being able to do direct-to-consumer online to Canada. And Canadians now can basically, as well as Mexicans, can buy more duty-free, up to a higher level than prior. I think it's de minimis level, which somewhere around $150 Canadian or so that has gone up. I think it's almost doubled. So again, might not have a huge impact in terms of our total dollars exported to Canada or trade flows because of USMCA, but for the smaller scale manufacturers and I'm thinking food processors and consumer good processors specifically that have built a nice brand, that have some opportunity, particularly in the Canadian and possibly Mexican markets. It just creates another avenue. So that was one nice, you're talking about lots of challenges on trade policy. It was very nice to get USMCA in place. I mean, Canada is just way too important of a trading partner. I think and for Maine, it's like over 50%, of our exports. So having that stability, I think, plays a huge role.
What do you think, Brian? You export your products to Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, the taxes on Canadian goods coming into the country, and then the retaliation on the Canadian government to then tax U.S. goods going in, definitely had some short-term and long-term effects. I think from a PR standpoint, there was probably a boycott on some American goods short-term because of that, you know, seen as sort of trying to bully people in terms of the products going there. So that was short-lived. Some of the longer lasting impacts are, you know, the cost of goods going up. Therefore, the price goes up, and, you know, it's not sustainable to keep on retail shelves anymore. So, you know, you can see some long-term effects of products coming off of grocery store shelves that used to be there. But I would agree that Canada is definitely an incredibly great market. A few misconceptions about Canada, that because they're 10% of the population, you're going to sell 10% of what you do in the US. I think that's a very big misconception. It's even though there are cousins, as Wade pointed out, different culture, different people, different tastes. So, you know, the products that are sold there may not be the same products that you sell in the US. It's very, very interesting to look at, you know, a product ranking sheet. Your number one seller here could be your number 10 seller in Canada, vice versa. So those are the types of things that we look at when we're looking at, you know, the business abroad, whether it be Canada or any other country for that matter. It just so happens that we do quite a bit of business with Canada. So I have a lot more information on that.
What is your number one product in your Canadian market?
In Canada, it's clam juice.
It's clam juice?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The Canadians have a drink up there called the Bloody Caesar, which is a take on the Bloody Mary, but includes clam juice, and it's everywhere. Every restaurant has it. They have the non-alcoholic versions of it. So you know, that's interesting.
Huh, that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that we're right about the time we should be switching to questions from the audience, which means I'm not going to get to my last question for our panelists. But let me just say, one of the folks who registered submitted this question when they submitted their registration, and that has to do with Brexit. So let me just get a quick reaction to this question. Should the UK leaving the EU be seen as a positive or a negative development for trade opportunities with Maine? So I'll just put that one out there first.
I can say that I've done a little bit of work prior to, you know, Brexit coming online. And I think that, again, people have been positioning for a while. In terms of positive or negative, I think that it depends on the industry area you're talking about. But certainly I've talked to a couple people in the service industry sector and fintech sector, and it's been very costly, you know, because you figure that you're positioning whether you can keep all your operations in London, where a lot of people used as a hub because either, you know, because English language speaking and because it's really one of the fintech capitals of the world.
Right.
And then suddenly you have to position because you have this Brexit going on, you know, coming online, and how are you going to deal with that in terms of inside the EU? So a lot of people have looked for alternatives. I've seen it both on the export side and on the services side, where it seems like Netherlands is kind of the next, Netherlands and Dublin, but particularly if you're shipping goods, you know, Netherlands as a center for both shipping and running operations. We know that IDEX has their Netherlands as their, you know, European headquarters, and there's a reason behind that in terms of English fluency. Netherlands has, I did 3PL work a couple of years ago doing some analysis because of Brexit for a company that was doing online sales as well as, you know, shipping less than truckloads around. And I was amazed at what the Netherlands could provide in terms of handling all of your VAT, being your fiscal manager, all of these things that are complexities that you have to think about when you're exporting and particularly if you're doing any direct to consumer work. So I think it's been costly for people who have had long-standing operations going on in both the UK and EU and having to figure out answers for both their markets that are important.
That's interesting.
Carol, I would just add, the good news is either way, you can get there from Portland. Part of the Eimskip connection is in Immingham, and we do have that direct trade route.
Very good. You're very good at your job there, John, making sure you got that opportunity.
John, that was so good. That was so good. I mean, I would go off of Janine a little bit. I think for the established companies, I think for the new companies kind of making their kind of first entree into the market, I'm going to go all the way back to our conversation about businesses, seeking certainty. And I think really what we need, and I heard this in the context of the trade policy conversation too, about a potential US-UK free trade agreement that's been being discussed for a while. Is that the UK needs to be out of the EU, and they need to have that relationship defined with the EU, the economic and trade relationship defined with the EU before a free trade agreement can happen. But I would say that whether the UK is in or out of the EU, what the businesses need, and I'm looking at Brian and hoping he's going to nod at me again, is that is that certainty, right? So that what the rules are of getting into the UK market, whether it's the EU's rules or the UK's rules. How did I do, Brian?
Perfect. I was actually just going to say, you just need to know what the rules are. That's it.
Thank God.
Great. Well, let's take the first question in our Q&A queue. Strawberry, can you tell us what is that question?
Sure. We actually have a question from Adrian. What are the most effective tips for companies that aren't exporting on how to get started in exploring export markets?
Good. And the ABCs, if you haven't done it before, where do you go first?
If you're a food company, contact Food Export US. I'm sure there are other industry specific programs like that the government has, but they've been fantastic for us to get up and running and started. The funding that's available when we can all travel again to attend trade shows outside of the US is phenomenal, and makes, John was talking about the barriers and the risks to doing overseas business. Well, if half my trip is paid for, my risk level just went way down, and that's something that the programs can do for you.
And is that a government program, Food Export US?
Yeah, it falls under USDA if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Is that right, Wade?
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So that falls under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The administrator of that program for Maine is actually sitting 2 offices down the hallway here, Jeff Bennett, who does fantastic work for that, represents the state on that board here in the Northeast. I'll just keep going and say that if you are a food company, you certainly can reach out to us. If you're not a food company, you can also reach out to us, the Maine International Trade Center. We're here, didn't really introduce ourselves much at the beginning here, but our role really within the state economic development entity or apparatus is to work with small businesses to help get them going on international trade development. And that takes a number of different forms. That is training, that's one-on-one consulting, and that's actually goes as far as taking companies overseas to trade events. One thing that I should mention, the food export program is fantastic. It is limited to food product companies. We do have a separate pot of funds that go through here at the Trade Center called the STEP program, which is administered through the U.S. Small Business Administration. That allows for some funding for companies to do a number of different market development activities, again, training, attending trade events, and be able to offset some expenses. We've had a lot of companies typically have used them for trade shows, being able to offset expenses of buying space or hiring interpreters or that sort of thing. While that's not happening, we've had a number of companies come to us looking to expand their web presence up their e-commerce game for international sales. Those are all expenses that are coverable under this program too. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in finding out more about us, check out the website at mitc.com, and there's information on all of those programs that you can have a look at.
Great. Any other must-know tips before we go to the next question?
I would just add in U.S. Department of Commerce, Commercial Services, Jeff Porter, who a lot of people know because he's our local presence there. They have export.gov, which answers a lot of initial questions on how-tos in terms of exporting and gives a lot of good trade stats so you can see what's going on in your industry sector. And they also have, similar to Food Export USA, they do B2B matchmaking. Right now they're doing virtual matchmaking. So I would say definitely that's a resource. It's a US government resource. We all pay for it with our taxes. So people should definitely use it. And I don't know how many, it used to be over 100 countries that they have, 120 countries that they have locations in country, usually co-located at the US embassies abroad, so that you also can connect with in-country representatives to talk about your product and also understand, the market viability.
The good thing about working in Maine on this space is that this is not a huge group of people working on international trade development. We all know each other pretty well. You're not going to get a wrong door. You call us, we'll get you over to Jeff. If you call Jeff, Jeff will get you to John. John will get you over here. Like, it is a small community, and we're pretty tight knit. There's not really a wrong door, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Let's take another question, Strawberry.
Sure. Do we have a free trade zone that would allow someone like Brian to import cans tariff-free for product that he will ultimately export? If yes, how effective has it been? If no, is there any thought of developing one?
John, that's your question. We talked about free trade zones.
So we have some benefits of a free trade zone, but we do not have one established here at the terminal. I think that's something that we've been looking at for some time, and could be a good idea. But we offered a service a number of years ago with LL Bean. Before we had maritime service, they were importing product through Boston or New York, and we had our drop and pick yard. And the notion is that they could come. They didn't clear customs until they left our yard. And most importantly, it was 24/7. So they could be moving product off hours and avoid rush hour. But any sort of those things that can provide an advantage are worth taking a look at.
So there are several foreign trade zones in Maine. Depends on who you're dealing with. The most active one is in Waterville, but there are others in Brunswick, one in Lewiston, one in Fort Madawaska, I believe, and one in Bangor. The one in Waterville has been kind of the most active and has been doing, I would say, similar in concept, certainly not in industry or anything like that, where they have been bringing in materials that are then used in the production of other things. I'm not going to go any further than that, just because we may be bumping up against confidentiality issues here. But there are some in Maine that could certainly handle that. If that was something that was of interest to Brian, I'd be happy to talk to Brian about that.
Great. Let's take one more question. I think we have time for that.
Sure. Question from Erno. What is the status of Coastwise Barge project?
I don't know what that is.
I don't know either.
Do you guys know what that is?
Coastwise? Yeah, I think I might. So the picture behind me is called an articulated barge. It doesn't actually exist, but it's something that the Port Authority designed with a federal grant. And the idea is to move containerized product via sea. The Marine Highway, we have been designated the Marine 95, the M95, which essentially would parallel 95 up and down the East Coast. I'll tell you, we're doing it now between here and Halifax. To do it domestically, there are a lot of legal complications, primarily the Jones Act. But we've been looking at it quite heavily, and we think it might be the future. I can tell you 40% of product that arrives in Antwerp actually arrives via water, leaves via water. And there are a lot of advantages to it from an infrastructure standpoint. We've been working with the city of New York and New York, New Jersey, where they have these externalities of traffic issues and that sort of thing, where it's extremely attractive to them. So it's something we're very interested in it. The economics have to work out.
Interesting. Does that exist? Is that just a concept drawing behind you?
It's a concept drawing. It's something that's used in petroleum domestically. And the notion is that that's a barge, but it has ship-like qualities. But it's offered at 40% of the CapEx and 40% of the OpEx of a traditional vessel, American-built vessel. So you can build that in America. You can crew it with an American crew, meaning you can go from port to port to port in the U.S. And we're remain very, very interested in it. I recently testified in front of Congress on the topic. And what I told them is you're going to have to make an investment similar to what we've made in the highway system. There needs to be an investment into the marine highway system. But I think it's a phenomenal idea, and its time will come.
Oh, interesting. Well, I wish we had more time. I know we have a few more questions in the queue. I would encourage folks to submit your questions anyway, and we'll see if we can get our panelists to answer them after the fact. I learned so much in this session. So thank you to all of our panelists. If we were at the Portland Public Library where we were doing our business breakfast forums before COVID struck, you would be surrounded by thunderous applause right now, because the audience, like me, would have learned a lot and would have appreciated your time. Out there in the Zoom world, we hope you'll come back and join us on December 17th for our final Making It Work segment. We're going to be reconnecting with some of the folks we had in the spring and how they changed directions in order to deal with the pandemic and what's the outcome been for them. So I think we're going to have a wide variety of experiences. We hope that you will join us for that. And again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to the sponsors. I think this has been really terrific. So enjoy the rest of your day.